This is Dan Bolen, and I'm the host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous, where people can come from all walks of life and hear stories of people that has embraced their fear and used courage to get through it. I want to encourage my podcasters to check my website, which is www.danbolen.com. And if you go down there, it says listen to podcasts, and then you can listen to all the podcasts. And there's a little button on the back or down that says you can listen to more, because some people are thinking it only has 3 or 4. But if you push more podcasts, you can see all of them that'll show up there. Also, as I mentioned before, Populi, who is the studio that I use, sends these out to over 30 media networks worldwide. So we're going to get some nice coverage, and they do a great job as well, too. Also, I paid to have them go on YouTube. So if you want to go on YouTube under Dan Bolen, The Courage to Be Courageous, you can listen to all the podcasts on YouTube as well. So welcome, all of you, to my podcast. I think we have an incredible guest today. It's Ralph Kellogg, who's out of Omaha, Nebraska. And we're looking forward to hearing a lot about him. I think he's got an incredible story. Ralph, welcome to the podcast. It's nice having you here today.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be with you.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about his career. I'll give you a little bit of his educational background. He has a bachelor's in business. He also has an MBA from Bellview University in Nebraska. And he also has a master's in conflict negotiation and dispute resolution. And so we're going to talk about how he uses that and the type of work he does today. But Ralph, we want to hear a little bit about your background. I think you had a fascinating background with your mother. And tell me a little bit about how you knew you were different and what it was like being raised by your mom.
Yeah, it was, looking back on it, it was sort of an extraordinary experience. So I was raised, by my mom's single-parent household in the early 1970s. And unusual for that time that my mom was a divorcee in America, didn't have the benefit of a formal education, and so really cobbled together a lot of different jobs to support the two of us over the course of time. My mom didn't come from the best backgrounds, and so I think that led her down a path to meet my dad, who was an abusive alcoholic, and
oh, wow.
and they divorced only because my father started to abuse me. And so, back in the 70s, there weren't a lot of resources or programs for battered women to seek help from. So she really did it on her own. I think because of all of the things that she went through from her childhood, not being loved or cared for or nurtured as a child, and then the relationship with my dad, I think it caused some mental health issues that she never really had addressed. And so living with my mom, especially when I got to be the age of like 5 or 6 or 7 and really started to develop my own personality, if you will, it became a scary place. My mom could be prone to violence. My mom was prone to rages. And so there were times when my mom would, what would be termed now physically abusive. And so it was also around the same time, probably 5, 6, 7 years old, that I knew that I was different, that I knew that I was gay. Now I know the term gay, but back then I just knew that I was not like all of the other boys in the neighborhood. And it was painfully obvious. I played with dolls. I was a little introverted. I liked being with the adults. I liked being with girls. It was just a very obvious difference between me and other boys in the neighborhood. And so dealing with that, knowing that about myself, and then also trying to navigate my mom and issues with her, it was a little bit of a challenging childhood, a little bit of a scary childhood at times as well. So I got very good about understanding her moods. I got very good about gauging the temperature of things when I walked into a room to know how I needed to behave and what I needed to do. And that really became the basis, the foundation of my life, sort of learning to walk into situations and take on the persona that I needed to in order to survive situations that might be, threatening or where I might be put in a situation that might be, physically scary, or where I might, be taken advantage of or something along those lines. So it was through all of that I sort of, grew up and took on my coping mechanisms, if you will, to survive.
Now, it's interesting because I know in grade school you were bullied.
Yes.
And you didn't have your mother to protect you because she could be violent at home.
Yes.
Isn't interesting that she left your dad because of violence and then she herself become violent?
Yes.
That's a sad situation there. So you're kind of hiding from the kids. Mm-hmm. And I think you were even telling me you'd run home from school because kids were following you or wanting to, attack you or whatever. Mm-hmm. But in high school, and that had to be so scary. And you had to be courageous to get through that. I really commend you for that. But when you got into high school, tell us about it changed, particularly when you met Tommy.
That was definitely a turning point in my life. So you're right. Grade school, middle school were very scary places for me. Being picked on, being called, every derogatory thing that you can think of when you're a young gay kid, and it just wasn't a good time for me at all. I also couldn't share that with my mom because my mom wasn't necessarily a sympathetic participant in what I was going through, and I knew if I told her, I would get ridiculed from her potentially, and she would, escalate the situation to the school, and it would just make things worse. So when I got into high school, I joined ROTC, and when I joined ROTC, I met someone who really changed the trajectory of my life, and his name was Tommy. Tommy was a year older than I was, and he knew what people said about me. He knew that people called me fag and gay and all of these really hurtful things, and he befriended me anyway. And he and I became very good friends, even though the friendship was very short-lived. It was the first time in my life that I had ever felt accepted by someone just for who I was. I didn't have to change. I didn't have to pose. I didn't have to watch what I said. He just accepted me for who I was. And never having that up to that point was a gift. It was just something that I didn't know that I needed until I got it. It was wonderful. He and I were friends for about 9 months. And one day in May of 1995, May 9th to be precise, we drove to a lake in Kansas City. Neither of us were seniors, but we went for senior ditch day. So he brought his girlfriend and she brought her friend. And we drove to Paradise Lake in Kansas City. And there was alcohol that he brought with him. And we decided to get a rowboat and row out to the middle of this little island in the middle of the lake. We docked the boat. We got out. Tommy had been drinking heavily by this point, and he, unbeknownst to me, I think I turned around, and the next thing I knew, he was in the lake and intoxicated and swimming farther and farther out into the lake, bobbing up and down, sort of doing this Marco Polo thing. And when he would break the surface of the water, he would say things like, aren't you going to save me? Ralph, aren't you going to save me? Aren't you going to come and get me? All of the comments were directed toward me. And finally, as I recall, he said, Ralph, don't you love me? Aren't you going to save me? And his back arched and he went under the water for the last time and he passed away. And
my word.
thinking through that time, I was 15, and I couldn't get over it. I could not understand for the life of me why I could not get over this. And one day it dawned on me that I did love Tommy. Tommy was my friend, but I was in love with him. He was the first person that I was truly in love with, that I can look back on my life and say, yeah, he was the first love. He was the first person. And about a year after he died, give or take a few days or a month or so, I had a dream about him. And in the dream, we had been arguing about something. I could tell that there was some sort of conflict. But at the end of the dream, he put his arm around my shoulder and he squeezed me. And in that moment, I realized it was okay. Everything was okay. He was okay. We were okay. He was in a good space, and he got on a motorcycle, which he didn't have when I knew him, and rode away. And that was the first and the last time that I've ever had a dream about him. But it was so profound. I'm going to be 53 next month, and I still remember that dream like it happened yesterday.
Wow. It's such a sad situation, Ralph, and I understand to lose someone who not only you love, but was in love with as well. I want to share one thought from the Trevor Project. When I did the interview with him on my podcast, they said anyone that is in a situation where they're being bullied or they're suicidal, if they have one adult that understands who they are and support them, that they're 40% less likely to commit suicide. Now, he was an adult by any means, but you made a comment that made me think of how powerful he was for you. And it was the first time in your life where someone really accepted you for who you were, because he knew you were gay and he accepted you for gay. Your mom at that time did not know and accept you. Certainly your dad did not know. I think he would be the first one in your life that really ever accepted you for who you were. Would that be a true statement?
That would be, yes, an absolute true statement. And I would add to that, even though I knew he was straight, there was nobody more girl crazy than Tommy. He loved girls. Even though I knew that, and even though I had an awareness that he knew that I was gay, I didn't feel the need around him to protect myself. I didn't feel the need to keep my guard up around him. And being in a situation where you're young and you know that you're secure with someone and you've never had that, wow, I can't tell you how profound that is. That is something that has always stuck with me.
Wow, that is an incredible point, Ralph. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry for your loss. Even today, you think about it, and the loss is still there because of how he was in your life. Now, you went to Creighton College, and you got a crush on a guy. I think you were 19.
I was 19. Once again, he was. I found myself, longing, pining after an older boy, and he was a sophomore in college, and completely. I believed he was gay. Maybe he is now. I don't know. I lost contact with him. But he clearly, at the time, gave me every indication that he knew I had a crush on him, but he wasn't interested. It just wasn't something that was going to happen. And I became so despondent. I felt rejected. It was the first time I had been away from home. I was dealing, with being long distance from my mom and still having this weird relationship with her, and being worried about her and almost feeling sort of this parental need to take care of her. And I just got myself into a really dark place, a really deep depression that I couldn't get out of. And yes, on St. Patrick's Day, this would have been 1989. I took a handful of Somanex sleeping pills and tried to take my life by suicide. And I think what saved me was that I did this in a chapel in one of the dorms, and I realized what was happening to me. I was starting to feel the effects of the pills, and I thought, oh no, I don't want to do this. This is not what I want to do. And I stumbled out into the dorm lobby and was fortunate enough to get help and wound up from that point going to the hospital and then spending 3 days in a psychiatric ward where I was given an evaluation, and then going back to school. What I missed from that experience is that there was no post-care treatment after I was let go from the psychiatric ward and went back to school. It was sort of business as usual. But for me, I was still dealing with, I'm gay, I'm at a really conservative school. My mom had gotten involved at that point, and I was hearing a lot of things from her, like, this is my fault. What did I do wrong? And so the situation became very projected with her instead of with me. And it was just a lonely place to be. Luckily, I had some good friends. I found my way out of it, but it took more counseling and probably a year or so before I felt like I was sort of on the right path at that point.
Is there anything that you think was a turning point for you? Was there things? Were you taking medicine at the time for depression?
No.
Counseling? You were getting therapy. What got you turning the corner out of your depression? Was there any event or process that did?
It was just a commitment to figuring out how I could survive. At that time in my life, I thought, I have to survive this. I have to get myself better. And I was raised in a family where you don't talk about mental health issues. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't let anyone ever see you in a state of a mental crisis. And so it was really ingrained in me that I had to get better. And even on days when I didn't feel like I was better, that old saying of fake it till you make it kind of thing really kind of stuck in my head. So looking back at a 19-year-old, then being a 20-year-old, the thought process was just survive, just pretend you're okay, and just survive. And eventually I did work myself out of, the despondency, the depression. I had gotten close with a few people at school. So I had a good group of friends who sort of rallied around me. But it wasn't through any of the traditional medications or things along those lines. It was I just learned to move past it and sort of buried it, I think, just to get through the day, so to speak.
Oh, that was courageous on your part. Very courageous. One of the things, too, sometimes I want to ask you this, Ralph, because I know it was in my case. Do you think you were battling shame?
Oh, absolutely.
Because shame will take you down.
Absolutely.
Shame will take you down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that for me, because I was at a very dark place in my life where I also tried to commit suicide. And to me, it was the shame, hating who I was and not loving who I was. So until I was able to break the shame, I really couldn't get better, and it couldn't be authentic.
Right.
That was courageous on your part too. So, wow, that's incredible. Now let's talk about your mom for a second, because she was having an affair with a married man, right?
She was.
And tell us how that went, because obviously you're an only child. Tell us how that affected you with her, because she would share details with you that she shouldn't be sharing with you. Tell us about that.
Right. So throughout the course of my life, as far back as I can remember, my mom had been involved with a married man. And I viewed it as normal. I didn't know any differently. So when I was very, very young, I viewed this as just normal. He would come over in the weekends. He would come over, on Saturdays. He stayed home on Sundays. That was the family night, so to speak. And as I got older, and started to question, started to think, other families don't live this way. It was just one of those things where my mom would sort of get very rooted and say, no one's going to tell me how to live my life. This makes me happy. This is what I'm going to do. That would be one stance that she would take. Then when she and this gentleman would have issues, I would be used as a therapist and be told, very intimate details of their relationship, things that a young kid doesn't need to hear, and things that when you're 10, 11, 12, even as a teenager, you don't know how to process. You don't know what to do with it once an adult situation is given to you, because you have no frame of reference. He at times, one time in particular, hit me as well. And so
wow.
I learned to be afraid of adults, because not only was I dealing with my mom and her boyfriend, but I was also, but because for part of my life, my mom relied on babysitters to take care of me. I was dropped off at babysitters where, there was a gentleman in particular who was an alcoholic. His wife was responsible for watching me, but he was always there. He would abuse me, physically abuse me. And so I just got used to being afraid, and I just got used to realizing that adults in my life were trustworthy up to a point. And I learned to keep being gay, being different, where I wanted my life to go. I learned to keep that compartmentalized because I knew, as bad as it would have been worse if that had been revealed. There was no way I was ever going to share with my mom or anyone at that point in my life that I was gay. The rejection would have been a lot. I was ashamed anyway, dealing with that shame. And I knew at some point in my mind, the fear of being physically hurt was also there. So I just kept it pushed down.
We had no adult in your life that you could be comfortable with, because in some way, physically or emotionally, they were abusive.
Right.
And so you're not going to trust someone. I mean, you had a tremendous amount of courage to get through it, but you basically were doing it all on your own. Wow, that is sad. And yet really a powerful comment. Had to be very hard for you.
It was.
And now we're going to talk about when you did come out, which is a very interesting situation. But you came out when you're about 22 or 23 years old, I believe.
Yes.
And how did that go when you told her you were gay?
It was terrible. There's no nice way to say this. It was terrible. So a lot happened to me when I was 22. So when I was 22, August, September, October of this would have been 1982. Lots happened. So I graduated from college in August of 1982. I came out in September and met my husband. Not in October. It would have been in November of 1982. So a lot happened in that 4 months. And when I told my mom, when I really felt certain that he was the person for me, I divulged that relationship. But prior to that, when I told her I was gay, it turned into, she just said some horrible things to me that still resonate with me. I remember being on the phone with her one time, and she said something to the effect of, "I don't want you to die. You're going to get AIDS and you're going to die." And said to me that she thought that my life would probably be based on me being alone, looking at pornographic magazines or pornographic movies, and that would be my life. And that's what she viewed being gay as. There was no celebration, there was no recognition, there was no acknowledgement. Even through the rest of my life with my mom, after I told her I was gay, we had a very surface level relationship. She did meet my now husband, and she did visit us a couple of times in our home, but in the 20 some years from me leaving home to her moving into a nursing home for Alzheimer's, she only visited twice. And I visited her the rest of the time. And she would always refer to my husband as your buddy or your friend. There was never an acknowledgement of my relationship with him. And so it was hard, again, to be authentic, to let my guard down, to have a real conversation with her when I knew she didn't accept all of me, and would never accept all of me. And so, my relationship with my mom was just very strained and very complicated. And I loved her because she was my mom. I just didn't like her. I just didn't like her as a person. Yeah,
I think when we talked on this and did the prelude on this, you said she couldn't identify with your pain and she made it about her pain.
Absolutely, all the time. All the time.
It's about, I raised a gay son. And so somehow it hit her shame core. And
right.
You being gay had nothing to do with her.
No.
It was who you were born, who you were. But It's interesting how many of our moms and dad takes on this pain with own pain.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do. It has to, I see this happen with these parents today. Some of them feel, and my partner, John, his mom kept saying, well, I must have did something wrong. Wasn't a better mother, wasn't doing this and wasn't doing that. And it has nothing to do with her. Just like it has nothing to do with your mom too.
Right.
Well, that was really, took a lot of courage for you to get through that. I think she passed away, didn't she, in 2019?
She did. She contracted early onset Alzheimer's, and she'd been acting differently up to, prior to that point. She was always a very domineering, direct, sort of shoot from the hip person, but she had really become sort of belligerent. And she got into a car accident. And this would have been in 2013. I went down to Texas to see her and sort of get her settled into her house and find out what was going on with her. And Dan, it brought up all the old emotions again. It brought up, it was just like I was 10 years old again. And I remember, I will never forget this as long as I live. I got there, I think, on a Sunday, and Tuesday of that following week, she had a series of doctor's appointments, and I had to go pick up some medication for her. I was standing in the waiting area to get her medication. I got on the phone with my husband, and tears are streaming down my face. Now, I would have been 42 or 43 at this point. Tears are streaming down my face because I just hated being around her. She was just so nasty and mean by that point. And so all of that childhood stuff that I had never resolved with her all came flooding back in that one moment. And I really then in that moment understood that if you don't resolve it, you carry it with you. You just carry it with you every single day. And it comes up. And so being with her in that time and in that space was really, really painful.
Gotcha. Have you forgiven your mom?
There are days I think I do. There are days that, I think you did the best you knew how to do with me. You did the best with what you knew how to work with. And so I try to look at her as a human being in that light. But there are also moments when I think, you should just have never had kids. You should have,
Yeah.
you just have never, ever had kids. So I think depending on the day, I forgive her. I don't have resentment or hatred toward her. It's just a lot of, I don't understand why you did what you did.
Right. And I think forgiveness is a process. I don't think it's an event.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still in the process of my mother's been dead for quite some time. I'm still in the process of forgiving her. My dad, who was the most abusive one, I had an easier time with because we did kind of come together. I was the only one that saw him pass away. Mm-hmm. But my mom allowed the abuse to go on. And so I'm in the process of forgiving her. So I understand where you're at, Ralph. Tell us a little bit how you were outed at work. I think this is interesting and kind of sad in a way.
Yeah, so that happened in my early 30s. I was working at a local financial in Nebraska that's no longer in business, and I was doing pretty well for myself. I had made a decent living. I was promoted to an assistant vice president. I felt like I was doing really well. One night, my then manager called my home, and it was back in the day before everyone had cell phones, so we all had landlines then. And my husband picked up the phone. My now husband picked up the phone and handed me the phone, and I talked to my manager and answered whatever questions she wanted. Conversation ended, and I didn't think anything about it until the following day when I was called into her office, and under the pretense of talking about something completely different. And she then said, I want you to feel like you can unburden yourself. I want you to know that you can talk to me. I want you to know that you don't need to be, ashamed or scared. And after she went on this little bit of a monologue for a minute, it dawned on me what she was talking about. And I immediately clicked in my head, she must know that I live with a man, that I'm gay. And I remember, my anxiety kicking in. I didn't know that I had anxiety at the time, but I remember I started to sweat profusely and my heart started to race. And I looked at her and I said, yes, I'm gay. The man you talked to was my partner. Absolutely, I'm gay, and believed at that point that she was an ally and that she would understand. Shortly thereafter, I started noticing that projects were being taken away from me. I was no longer being asked to do things that were, of note or of special interest within the organization. And I felt my role starting to really get diminished. And so a few months after this conversation, I went and talked to her and I said, listen, this could all be in my imagination, but I'm not being included. I'm not being asked to do things. I'm not being involved. What's going on? And she looked at me and said, I think things would be better served if you just found something else to do outside the organization. And I immediately knew what she meant. I went to Human Resources and they said, you know what, there's nothing we can do about it. Gay people at that time, this would have been 2002, 2003, there were no laws protecting gay people anywhere in Nebraska or anywhere in the Midwest. They said you're covered under our non-discrimination policy, but I knew that wasn't anything that was going to be used to protect me against this person. Ultimately, what I wound up doing, because I didn't feel like I had any other recourse, the company was sold not so long after that, and I wound up leaving the organization. But to know that you could be outed and that you could have everything taken away from you so easily, again, really let me know what it's like to not have power or feel like you have agency over your life. It was such a humbling, shameful experience. Because there was no one I could go to. There was no one I could talk to. There was no one who would be an ally. It was just deal with it. Deal with it. If you don't like it. Yeah.
Well, things have changed nowadays. The laws have changed now.
Yes.
So this type of thing they couldn't get away with the laws today. I want to talk a little bit about your TED Talk. I think this is pretty fascinating. as I said, I connected with Ralph on Facebook, and then he sent me this TED Talk. And it was it was such an incredible talk. He talks about overcoming anxiety. And this has been an issue that you've struggled with. And we know some of our podcasters have struggled with anxiety and really serious anxiety, even to the point their breathing is affected. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to deal with that and use courage to get through it, and then tie that in with the TED Talk.
Yes. Anxiety and panic, as I had shared with you, have been part of my life as long as I can remember. I just didn't know what they were. I just thought you're weird in some way, and this is just who you are. And so I really remember, after being outed by my manager, really feeling the first sort of wave of anxiety and panic in the workspace. So this would have been when I was in my early 30s, and I remember subsequent times after that, if I would get nervous or scared or feel threatened, that I would start perspiring. My heart would start racing. My chest would tighten, and I just thought, this is just your response to stress. Again, not investigating, not knowing, not telling my doctor, not being forthcoming with my doctor. When it all sort of congealed for me was when I came back from seeing my mom in Texas, after she had her accident, and I had been with her for 2 weeks. And this is after me standing in the pharmacy lobby crying, and just it was just a terrible time. And I came back, and the first day that I was back, I was in my office. My manager walks in, says, "Hey, I'd like for you to run this report for me." And immediately I start sweating. My chest starts pounding. It was awful. And I did what she needed me to do. I made an appointment with my doctor. I told him this had been going on for years. He referred me to a therapist. And I finally, at that point, got help. The therapist said, "You have anxiety, and I think you have a panic disorder." And so it took a little bit of time, but through cognitive therapy and getting me on meds, I was diagnosed with anxiety and panic. And I remember telling my therapist, I said, "I've done this all my life." And she said, "Well, after sharing some of the things that you've shared with me, this was a coping mechanism that you learned, and so this kicks in." So I thought, oh, ding, ding, ding. That makes sense. And so I learned when it was coming on to control things with my breath. I learned to exercise. I learned to do meditation. I learned to do different things that when I started to feel anxious or when I started to feel panicky, I just learned these coping skills. The other thing I did is I stopped being ashamed of it. I just would tell people, if they would say, "Why are you sweating? It's not warm in here." I would just simply tell them, "I'm feeling anxious. Give me a minute, and I'll be okay." Because what I realized about myself is the more I tried to stop it, the worse it would become. The
more it became, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so I just got very, very honest about it. And then how that plays into the TED Talk is in 2020, I thought, oh, hey, it would be a great idea to switch jobs and switch industries. We're just in the middle of a pandemic. How stressful could this be? And so when I started my job where I am today, I started getting calls from people in the HR industry saying, "How are you dealing with this?" And the pandemic, and people are feeling this way and that way. And I remember saying, I don't know. I don't have any special way that I'm dealing with it. I thought that everyone was dealing with it the same way I was, which was, binge eating and shopping on Amazon and watching Tiger King. I didn't have any through this. And the longer it went on and the longer I felt isolated from people and work and all of those things, my anxiety and panic started to kick in. And so that's when I developed what I share in the TED Talk, which is the ACT model, which is, the acknowledgement, compassion, and accountability and transparency. And I really at that point became an advocate of thinking, if we could talk about this in the workplace and remove the stigma and shame from it and just say, This is part of the human condition, like a cold or anything else that people have. What a great thing that would be for people in the work environment to think that I can just say my anxiety is really, really, heightened today, or I'm really feeling panicky today, or I'm feeling depressed, and call the things by what they are instead of using euphemisms or coded language or things that are, maybe less offensive or scary to people. And so that's really where the model came from. And that's really where the basis of the talk came from.
Now, Ralph, if someone wanted to hear that, you sent me a copy, and I thought it was such an incredible talk. And also, it really was informative to me and gave me a lot of information about social anxiety. How would they be able to hear that? Can they just go to the TED Network, and can they put in your name, and would they be able to find it that way?
Yep, just go on YouTube and type in my name and TED Talk, and it'll come right up.
Okay, great. Yeah, I want to encourage my podcast listeners. If you're dealing with any social anxiety, I think it's a must. You must hear this. It's pretty incredible and helpful. I got so much help out of it. I think I was even more relaxed when I listened to it. I don't have anxiety, but I'm super hyper. It did kind of cool me down a little bit, calm me down. It's a great talk, and I really appreciate you being able to do that and sharing that with our listeners. Now, I want to talk just a little bit here. I know we're getting close to running out of time, but I think this is so incredible. You work for the Lutheran Family Services, mm-hmm. and it's the leadership in adoption and behavior health. I've got a couple of notes here, but I don't know how they all go together. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
Yes, the organization is over 100 years old. It got its roots in adoption, but it's grown now to adoption, foster care, behavioral health, both for adult and children, and refugee placement services. So one of the incredible things that we do is when you see people fleeing Afghanistan, Ukraine, places along those lines, Nebraska is one of the states that provides settlement services. And so we will help people with getting settled into homes, getting settled into work, children in school, all of those kinds of things. So I wouldn't say that we are a sanctuary city, but we are definitely a city or a state that supports the refugee community when they're coming over through, fleeing war-torn countries or things along those lines.
And I can see you, Ralph, being great at that. You're the type of personality and such a gift you're giving to these refugees. I want to thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit. I told Ralph that I always like my podcasters because they've gone through a lot of pain, and they've embraced their pain, a huge courage to get through it. You've been through a hell of a lot of pain. I mean, a hell of a lot of pain, but you've gotten through it. And you become, I think, it kind of molds who we are in a lot of ways. If we don't run from the pain, if we embrace the pain, courage molds us who we are. What would you like to share with our listeners about if they're going through struggles, anxiety, depression? What would you like to share with them with your life story that they could help them perhaps deal with what they're dealing with? Can you share a thing or two?
Sure. I would say that most importantly, to know that you're not alone. I think when we're going through situations that really feel heavy or are new to us or scary, it's natural to feel like I'm the only one or I'm alone. And I assure you that you aren't. The other thing that I would say, too, is if you're struggling, reach for help. Find that friend, find that support group, if you connect with someone online, talk to someone online, whatever you need to do to find help. The other thing that I would say too is you can struggle and you can have a lot of turmoil and a lot of things go on in your life, and you can come out on the other side of it, and you can still have a happy life, and you can still achieve and do and be and meet incredible people and do incredible things. So I always like to look at my life and think, it is a book, And some of the things that have happened to me in my life have been really terrible footnotes, but they haven't defined the chapters, and they haven't made the journey any less beautiful, and they're not going to define the end of my story. All they are footnotes.
It's interesting, and that's such a powerful comment. And I think you made a comment to me when we were preparing for this. You said, all the stuff I went through with my mom, all the awful things, in some ways it made you more empathetic.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When you go through pain, when you know what it's like to feel ashamed, when you know what it's like to feel different or othered or outside looking in, it absolutely, at least in my case, allowed me to say, I don't want to be that person. I want to be that person who is caring, who is giving, who's supportive, and who does it without judgment, because I've been in situations where people didn't know my story and I was judged. And I know how painful that is, and how isolating that can be.
Wow. Ralph, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I feel like I've made a really new friend here, a good new friend.
Yes, I feel the same.
This is one of the reasons I do these podcasts. My people who share the podcasts with me, they uplift me with their story. Even though it can be painful, I feel uplifted. I feel like I understand someone. And I just thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's a real pleasure meeting you. Hopefully we get a chance to meet you and your husband, Steve, in the near future. Yes. And thank you so much for your powerful story and the courage that you use to get through the fear in your life. Thank you, Ralph. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Dan. You as well. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.